listening to Magic from Wherever I'm At with your host, the magician, time traveler, and charmer, Dartagnan.
Welcome to another edition of the podcast. I am Dartagnan, and today I'm going to relate one story from the first 2 weeks on the street that I spent, because I think this was a very important lesson. And the first 2 weeks I spent were with two of my mentors, Eric Evans and Jimmy Talks a Lot, in Ocean City, Maryland, almost 5 years ago now. And I learned so many lessons in those first 2 weeks. I mean, it was like a barrage of lessons and learning that I still take with me today. It just keeps going forward because the lessons were like so sharp. It was like getting poked with a pointy stick or something, because it was so obvious what was going wrong. And if you're analytical like me, it just like beat me overhead with a shovel. But there was a particular show, and I've told this story many times in real life to other people, but I was doing a particular effect at the end of my street show back then. Now, when I first 2 weeks on the street, I really didn't have a show. And so this effect was basically, you'd have the whole audience, a lot of members of the audience shuffle the deck of cards. I'd bring somebody up. I had a table at the time. They'd deal down 10 cards, hold them like a poker hand, and I would stand on the other side of the audience and tell them, without looking at them, with my back turned, just reaching out with my hand, what cards they were holding. Now, I had done this trick a lot in my indoor shows at the time, and I had a really sort of what I would call now a fancy ending, that was preposterous. Indoor show got a pretty good reaction, actually, which goes to show you kind of the, how would I put it? Maybe the kind of, just people are really nice indoors. It's not as plain of a arbiter, for what is good and what is not. Because on the street, the first rule is if you're not entertaining, it's over. We'll get to that in future episodes about why magic alone is a very poor idea. So I'm out there, I'm doing this trick, and the first 2 weeks on the street, I was working up to like doing a whole whack load of shows a day. I was just grinding through as many terrible shows really as I could, to learn as many lessons as I could and just get better at like handling the audience, building the crowd, all that kind of stuff. And sort of starting to get an idea for what people liked and what they responded to. I was doing this particular trick, in one show, right near the end of my 2 weeks there, within a few days of the end. And instead of the fancy ending that I had, which had, quote unquote, worked so well indoors, when I got near the last card, and there was a person in the front row, a young guy, and I had the crowd just in the palm of my hand. You could sense as I went through telling which cards the person was holding, like just the rise in the tension of people saying, "Oh my goodness, how is he doing this?" And there was one lady sitting on a planter very close to where I was standing, and she turned to her friend. She says, "I don't know how the bleep he's doing this," and kind of under her breath, which was really funny. But this person at the near the end, I'm concentrating, I'm thinking, I can't come up with the card, I'm obviously struggling, and this guy just shouts out, "You can do it, man!" And in that moment, my intuition was to just, quote, just play it straight, if you will, to just name, perhaps to just name the last card and cast aside the fancy ending and just, play it straight, basically, because I could sense that my intuition was the audience wanted me to win, right? And to test that intuition, though, because it was so obvious to me that that's what the situation was, I went with the fancy ending anyways, because I wanted to immediately test my intuition. And this is one of the things you never see people do very often, is they're not testing different iterations of the show. They just keep doing the same things, and they're just oblivious to the feedback of an audience. I've met many street performers now, and many magicians and other performers, other variety performers, who are just banging out the same stuff with like no care for what the audience thinks, and certainly unreceptive to any feedback, especially obvious feedback that the audience is giving. And we'll get into that in episode 6 in a big way. So if you're listening to this will be episode 4. Episode 6 will be a master class that I saw go down about how to respond, how an audience responded and what somebody did not do with that information. So I test my intuition by playing the fancy ending, and man, did it. And it was so beautiful in a way, because it just crushed the show. Like, everyone hated the ending, and the people were just so disappointed, and they thought I was an idiot, I'm sure. And they just walked away like nobody tipped. I remember this one little girl, she probably was 6. She walked back. There was like an ice cream thing next to where I was. And she went over, and her parents sort of gave her $5, and she came back and just gave me $5. And that was like the only tip I think I got out of the whole show, maybe. I just remember that stark picture. But I thought to myself, I didn't care, because I was just trying to get better. You shouldn't, especially in your first couple of years, worrying about the money is like not your priority. Your priority is to get better. You're going to make some money anyways. You almost have to fall over yourself backwards. And if you're not analytical at all, maybe, but if you're just even a fraction aware of the world, you will continue to get better. And that's what you should be worried about, is getting better. Because the money can come and go in big waves and stuff depending on how many people are there. So there's a lot of factors to it, and it's not always a good arbiter of whether you're good or not. So once you start getting certain reactions and you have people connect with you in a certain way, that's how you know you're getting better, but more so than the money, in my opinion anyways. Now, so the beauty of the street is, like, 10 minutes later, after I had that horrible experience, I could do another show, play it straight, like I felt I should have done that show, and see if that really was the case. And that next show, when I played it straight, it just crushed in the opposite way, which is like everyone was happy, people were cheering, money flowed, seemed like it was falling from the sky, especially back then. And it was such a beautiful thing, because that lesson was immediately applicable, and I put it to action, and the results were like night and day. And there's a lot of things like that on the street, especially in your first formative year or so, where you're, especially in the first like 3 months, 4 months, because you're really just banging out these shows as fast as possible. You're trying to get through them, get comfortable, especially if you're not that comfortable talking to people, talking to strangers out in the street. All that stuff comes to bear. And so that one lesson I can just remember so starkly, that guy just screaming out, you can do it. And that was the tension that trick and the way I was doing it would build in the crowd. And so they just wanted me to win. And then when I won, they won, everyone was happy, and they just walked away so amazingly happy with the outcome, which is so important. Because, that's who you're doing it for. If you're going to listen to episode 5, I'm going to talk more about this, which is who you're doing the show for. It's for them. So that's the story for today. Now we're going to get into the rant section of the show, of course. My ideas are wholly my own and come from my own experience and my mentors in many cases. And one of the things that you quickly learn on the street, and probably should learn if you're just doing magic anywhere really, is that the tricks are not the important part. There's a lot of the magic community just absolutely consumed with the methods, the tricks, all the technical aspects. And it's really sad in many ways, because magic is first and foremost a performing art. And you really can't understand magic unless you actually perform for people you don't know. If you go back to the first episode where I gave my definition of what a magician is, somebody who performs regularly for people they don't know, that is because you're getting real feedback from people who don't know you, have nothing invested in you in terms of like trying to maintain your self-esteem or whatever. And so they just give you these bold-faced reviews, of like, boy, that, but on the street especially, because they just walk off. Those people in that story I just told, they just left when I went for the fancy ending and everything just got destroyed. They just left, they hated it. And it was like so obvious. So this is the thing. If you're in magic, the tricks, the way I look at it anyways, are the tricks, the techniques, and all the stuff that you learn on how to be good at that stuff is basically just the very foundation. Like if you were building a house, that's the cement or whatever at the bottom that you can start to build a house on. For most people, that's like the end of the house. It's like they do the trick, they string a bunch of tricks together, and hey, this is magic, which is just terrible. The tricks are just the foundation. All the learning of the tricks and stuff is just you're just getting started. Once you have those tricks, once you're able to do it, and it's sort of all a process that overlays, time-wise, it's all working in concert. There's a synergy to working on everything simultaneously, sort of, you're learning how to do the trick, but you're also, and the techniques perhaps, some of which you may or may not know or be new to, but also, what I don't see is people taking more time to work on the presentation, which is really, why should people care about this? And like, how are you going to frame this trick so that it's entertaining and it connects with the audience in many ways? This is, you have all these things at your disposal, humor, plot, the way you're going to frame the whole, why you're telling this. Maybe it's a story, maybe it's a psychological experiment. Maybe it's, some sort of horror mystery thing, or who knows? There's a litany of ways. There's a great book out there called 20 Master Plots. Can't remember the author's name, but it's 20 Master Plots and like how to construct them or something like that. I'll try and find the reference for another show perhaps. But you have all these literary and theatrical tools at your disposal. And it's really sad when I see magicians just bang out tricks, string them together with such a weak presentation, just talking through what my mentor, Eric Evans, what he would call processed patter, where you're just verbally telling people what you're actually doing. Like, I'm going to take this card, we're going to put it back in there's nothing worse than that. We've all done it, especially at the beginning, but you got to get away from that immediately, just forget that. If that's what you're doing, like, don't bother, because it's just so weak and so tired that you're just going to alienate the audience and stuff. The good thing about magic and the bad thing about magic in that respect is that the tricks themselves are often very surprising. You're standing on the shoulders of giants when you're doing a lot of these tricks, because these things are so cleverly constructed and constructed in a way to just like absolutely come out of nowhere. But at the same time, because of that, a lot of people spend no time on their presentation, like I'm saying, and they're just relying just on the strength of that surprise. And that is a terrible idea. And I'm going to just, get rid of that in your mind right now, because you should take at least 3 times as much time as you're spending on actually learning the trick and the techniques and stuff, and use that as a presentation. That is like the minimum, I would say. I once heard Ricky Jay say he didn't show anything to anybody unless he'd been working on it for 6 months, or it may have even been a year. I don't remember. But that is the kind, this is like the world-class sleight of hand person, but it applies to anybody. You got to come up with, maybe you're going to use a story. You're going to find humorous lines. You need something that's just a basis. Now, once you finally start doing it, that's all going to change, because you'll see what your ideas play like in the real world. And you can do that relatively fast. But if you just come out saying, all right, I want you to pick a card. Now we're going to put it in the middle. Now you're going to shuffle them. Now I'm going to put them in my pocket. Do you think I could just reach in? I mean, it's so terrible, and it's so boring, and it's such a lack of creativity. And we should really be striving to raise it up by using humor, coming up with a engaging reason people should care. Maybe it's a personal story. Maybe it's a weird thing that happened to you. Maybe it's a weird thing that happened to somebody else. I mean, you got to sit down and come up with reasons like why you're going to tell somebody this, other than just like, hey, you want to see a magic trick? Because that's like the lowest, weakest form. Okay, so once you have that foundation in place of knowing how to do the tricks, the methods, and you're competent at actually doing, the sleight of hand or whatever methodology it is to accomplish, then you have to begin the real work, which is the presentation. A lot of people call, oh, this is the real work. A lot of magic books and stuff say, oh, this is the real work. On dealing, maybe secret dealing or the real work on card, the card mechanics. All that stuff is just bullshit. What the real work is actually coming up with a presentation that people care about so that you can make it entertaining and engaging for the audience. That's the real work. And anything short of that is just a preparation for that, basically. So that's my rant for today. Start building your presentations. Yeah, it could be silent, even, but there's so much humor and theatricality in a silent. I mean, go back, watch Chaplin, stuff like that. Build your presentations, people. Let's take this art to a new level, and we'll see you next episode. Thank you very much.